Okay, good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Agenda updates. I believe we're going to be pulling an economic development item, the Great Neighborhoods project we're going to pull from consideration this evening, which is number 5 under economic development. So we'll pull that one, and with that, I will ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mr. Schultz?
Here.
Mr. Tassoni?
Present.
Mr. Webster?
Here.
Mr. Westcott?
Present.
Mr. Arena?
Here.
Mr. Billich?
Here.
Mr. Boomer?
Here.
Mr. Booker?
Present.
Mr. Butita? Mrs. Crosby?
Here.
Mr. Fellers?
Here.
Mr. Fiducia?
Here.
Mr. Gurl? Mrs. Gorl?
Present.
Mr. Hoffman?
Present.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. McDonald?
Present.
Mr. Neighbors?
Present.
Mrs. Red?
Present.
Mr. Salgado?
Present.
18 present, 2 absent.
Thank you very much, Clerk Gummow. With that, we will have our invocation and pledge, and we will ask everybody to stand, and I'll turn things over to Mr. Salgado. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together tonight and bringing us joy. We ask that you bless each one of us tonight and protect our families. We ask that you protect our first responders and military personnel and their families. Lord, we ask you give us your guidance and wisdom to do the right things for our communities, cities, and counties. In your name we ask you, amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado. Okay, again, good evening, everybody. Our first item of business under awards and proclamations, I'm going to ask Danielle Angelieri from NAMI to please come on up. We have Danielle here, and she's part of a great organization in the community that we're going to celebrate here in a minute, but our first item is to have a proclamation in recognition of Mental Health Awareness Month. Whereas mental health awareness is part of overall health, and whereas mental health helps to sustain an individual's thought processes, relationships, productivity, and ability to adapt to change or face adversity. Mental illness adversely affects those abilities and often is life-threatening in nature. Whereas 1 in 5 adults experience mental health problems in any given year, and such problems can contribute to the onset of mental illness. 1 in 17 adults live with mental illness, such as major depression, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia. Whereas approximately 1/2 of chronic mental illness begins by the age of 14 and 3/4 by the age of 24. Whereas long delays, sometimes decades, often occur between the first time symptoms first appear and when individuals get help. Early identification and treatment can make a profound difference in successful management of mental illness and recovery. Whereas it is important to maintain mental health and learn the symptoms of mental health illness in order to get help when it is needed. Whereas every citizen and community can make a difference in helping end the silence and stigma that for far too long has surrounded mental illness and discouraged people from getting help. Whereas public education and civic activities can encourage mental health and help improve the lives of individuals and families affected by mental illness. Now, therefore, be it resolved, I, Frank Haney, Chairman of the Winnebago County Board, and on behalf of the entire County of Winnebago, do hereby proclaim May 19, 2019 as Mental Health Awareness Month. And with us today is Danielle Angelieri from NAMI of Northern Illinois. And I can just say, personally watching her, She's an outstanding young leader in our community, and she's doing a ton of advocacy around this important issue that I know we're all very passionate about, and our friends at the Health Department are very passionate about as well. So let's give Danielle a hand. And since I'm a big fan, we're going to present Danielle with the Chairman Service Excellence Award. I, Frank Haney, Chairman of the Winnebago County Board, recognize Danielle Angelieri, Executive Director of NAMI Northern Illinois, for her hard work and advocacy for mental health in Winnebago County. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you, everybody. And I just want to thank you guys for acknowledging mental health care in our community. It's very important to us all, and especially us at NAMI. We keep moving forward. So the national NAMI has a campaign going on. It's called Why Care. So I just want you to think about that for a moment. Why do we care about people living with mental illness? Why do we care about our mental health? Like was said earlier, 1 in 5 people live with a mental illness, and that's going to affect everyone in this room, everyone that you've ever met. And we've taken so many steps forward, but there's still miles to go for mental health care, and we're glad to have you behind us. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Our next item of business, we have a presentation from Ann Wasser, the Executive Director of Severson Dells, who's the new Executive Director. I believe she's about a year and a half in, but she's also helped kick off 815 Outside, and she's here to talk to the board and just kind of give an update. This is something, and I want to thank the board a lot for their support of promoting our natural assets as a way to promote our overall region. It's I think, a distinct competitive advantage for our community, what we have in the form of natural resources. Ann?
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. So 815 Outside was sort of a brainchild that kind of came to fruition late last fall, and we were able to get all of the partner organizations, which you'll see on the back of the RAC card that was handed out, all the different organizations in Winnebago County that are involved in making this a success. And we were able to pull it off, pull off these resources in a really short amount of time. But it is really designed to be a one-stop shop for all things outdoors in Winnebago County. Because so many people don't necessarily recognize the plethora of resources and places people can go to get outside, most of which are free. We have almost 20,000 acres of protected green space between the forest preserves, the Park District, the Natural Land Institute, Nature at the Confluence, Clem Arboretum, which is a forest preserve property. But all of those different resources are great places for people to get outside for recreation, but there's also the growing body of evidence to the positive mental and physical health benefits that come with spending time outside, even if it's just half an hour. There's a lot that can happen there. So we've got 2 main resources that are a part of this initiative. The first one is the website, and we, again, tried to make it that one-stop shop for all things outside. Let's see if we can get the mouse to work. There we go. So my favorite resource on the website is this this page right here, and it basically allows anybody to say, you know what, I want to go fishing today, or I want to go figure out where I can go camping. You click on a tab, and up will pop up a map of Winnebago County with different icons of all the different places you can go to do that activity. So whether it's bike trails, again, winter activities, geocaching, birding, I mean, all the different ways that we can think of to get outside. And if you have other suggestions, let us know, because we're more than happy to add more resources to it. We really just wanted to make the outdoors more accessible and help people find the places they can go explore in Winnebago County. And then the next resource is the Facebook page, which is really nice, and that we decided to do as a place that we can share all of the different partner organizations' events. because all this is being managed by staff that are already doing everything else at their respective organizations, and we tried to make it easy to put all of those events and all of those things in one spot. So if you're looking for something to do this weekend, you can go to the Facebook page, and all of the partner events are all listed in there under the events tab, and you can go find out what Clem's doing that day, or the Park District, or Severson Dells. So making that easier for people to find, so you don't have to go to each one of those 6 organizations to figure out who's doing what. You can go to one spot. So we're really excited about this. I think there's a lot of potential. We've had it out now for about a month and a half, and have gotten a really positive response. We've been out at as many community events as we can get out to. So Youth Expo, Natural Living Expo, will be at Friday Market next week. Just trying to get the word out about this. And for me personally, it's about getting beyond the choir. So getting beyond the people that are already spending time outside, because they already know where a lot of these places are. But if we can get it to the next step of people that may not necessarily know where their local forest preserve is, or where their local park might be, or where they might be able to go fishing, and making all this stuff a lot more accessible, so that hopefully long term we can start to see some positive health benefits for our community, in getting more active outside.
So from a tourism standpoint, we've reclaimed first from sports tourism, sports marketing standpoint over the last several years. And with what we have as a community in a region, I think the next several years may be luring people to our community to visit from just taking advantage of our natural resources. So I think it has a tourism benefit as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the 4 rivers to paddle. You've got the new bike trail down at Atwood Park. You've got all these new things that are happening, but we also have sort of those things we've had for a long time that people may not think about anymore. So if we can bring those things front of mind, that's what we're really, really hoping to do.
Any questions for Ann? Yes, ma'am.
I really want to make a comment, because I know that Winnebago County is probably one of the prettiest counties in the state of Illinois. I'm also aware of all the functions we have here. You don't need to travel 200 miles to go on a vacation. You can stay in your home, save the fees, and travel Winnebago County. And there, you can go from tagging birds to fishing. I learned to canoe on the Kishwaukee River. My daughter learned to canoe on the Sugar River. It's not that we don't have all these amenities here, and yet we're going everywhere that costs us lots of money when we can do it very economically here in our own county. It's a wonderful county, and what goes on downtown is even better yet, because it brings everybody together. If they're here for sports, like we're going to continue being the sports center, now they have other places to take their children that should all be advertised. Severson Dells, I had a wonderful lunch there yesterday, and Dorothy and Jim Webster and I. It's nice to be kind of semi-retired, because then you get to be invited to these places, and it was a real experience. We had students that Patty Oliveri has and she trains them out to the Hoffman House, so you know you got a good lunch there. And for those of you who have time and don't work full-time jobs, you might want to let these ladies know that you are available to go out there for 1 hour to Severson Dells, sit in this lovely old place, look at the birds come in and get fed, something you're not going to see in your backyard, and notice all the trails out there. So I do advise our county board members who have the time, give these girls your names so they can get you on a list and have you out for lunch. Doesn't that sound like fun?
Yep, and
That's one afternoon to spend. It's
yep,
wonderful.
And even if you're not available during the day, we do night hikes, we have evening programs, so we'd love to have you out anytime you'd like to come visit. So,
Thank you for being there.
thank you.
So, thank you very much, Ann. I do have one quick thing here. Want to give the Chairman Service Excellence Award to Ann as well for all that she's doing. Again, she followed somebody who was an executive director at Severson for many decades, did a great job, and so following someone like that can be tough, and she's come in and just done a spectacular job. So we're very honored to have you here tonight. And with that, I, Frank Haney, Chairman of the Winnebago County Board, hereby recognize Ann Wasser, Executive Director of Severson Dells, for outstanding leadership in creating 815 Outside. 815 Outside is a multi-agency partnership that aims to raise awareness, both locally and statewide, of our many natural assets in Winnebago County. If you could join me in giving Ann a big round of applause. Thank you again, Danielle and Ann. Our next item of business is public comment. We do have one speaker, I believe, tonight. Is Vicki Ivy here? Hi, Vicki. As Vicki's coming up, she's going to talk about improving the area of South Beloit and has a question related to jurisdiction. I'm going to read our disclaimer. Comments shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers may not address a zoning matter which is pending before the ZBA, zoning committee, or the county board. Personnel matters or pending or threatened litigation may not be addressed in open session. An individual may speak a maximum of 3 times per calendar year on the same topic. This prohibition shall include the repetition of the same topic in a statement of what is purported to be a different topic. Personal attacks or inappropriate language of any sort will not be tolerated. With that, I want to welcome Vicki and thank you for being here. Where's she? Oh, there you are. Come on up. Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you. Glasses on. Good evening, everyone. My name is Vicki Ivy, and I am a Rockland Township trustee, but today I'm not here for Rockland Township. I'm here as a citizen of Winnebago County. I live in South Beloit, Illinois. I'm part of Rockland Township, and we really don't know who has jurisdiction over us. We had someone coming out to tear some buildings down, and I called Mr. Webster about it in South Beloit, which South Beloit doesn't have authority over us. So it's kind of like we're in an area where it needs to be redeveloped, and there's grants going out all around us, but there's nothing coming to our area. So I'm here today to see if I can get some answers or to be able to talk with someone to see if we can figure out if there's any kind of grants or anything, because South Beloit get the grants, but we're not allowed to apply for them because we're in the township, and Rockland gets grants, but we're not allowed to apply for those. So, and I know because I've tried it. So I know what they're saying to me. So who has the say-so over us out there? We're taxpayers, we're voters, we're paying Rockland Township taxes, but it's like every time you go to get some help to try to develop the neighborhood, I don't get any answers, and a lot of the other people don't either that try. A lot of the people are frustrated out there. They're scared. They don't know where to go, where to turn to. They don't want to lose their homes. And like the guy came out and was talking about some property, and he was like, the city of South Beloit wants to. He said he was sit out there to get a bid, tear it up, dig up the cement, bring black dirt in, fill it in, take all the rubbish away, and plant grass. That's a lot of money for a homeowner to have a lane put against their home when it doesn't take all of that. And when some of these homes can be refurbished, or we can put our neighborhoods to work, try to get something to put people to work and help them build up their neighborhoods back again. And so they can have pride and, and want to make the neighborhood better. And that will probably cut down on some crime, a lot of things when you give people hope and make them feel better. So I'm here today just to see if I can get someone to give me a call and answer some questions. And
Vicki, thank you very much, and I don't want to cut into your time, but I hear what you're saying. I think we all hear you. Is it okay if I have a staff member call you tomorrow and just make sure they ask a few questions to dig a little deeper on this?
Yes, it is.
That way they can understand that, and then they can follow up with Mr. Webster and Carla and myself and just make sure we're aligned, and then we'll get in touch with you tomorrow and make sure we understand the issues here. And
Okay,
it
that'll be
probably
fine.
I would think would be somebody from Mr. Dornbush's office or Mr., maybe Carlos from Highway, I'm not sure yet. But we
Okay.
will have one of them give you a call tomorrow, if
Okay,
that's okay.
sounds great. That's
Is there
fine.
anything else you had for us, ma'am?
no, that's it for right now.
Okay, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Is that okay, Mr. Webster, and the next step? Okay, thank you very much. Our next item of business, board member correspondence. Any comments by board members? Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. I have here a certificate of appreciation awarded to the Winnebago County Board. And it was awarded on May 15th, and it says the first ever State of Illinois Trauma Informed Awareness Day. So we participated in that, and we have a certificate. I'll send it around so you can see it, and then I'll give it to the chairman.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Red. Any other comments? Mr. Westcott, then Mr. Arena. Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to make mention of the 6th annual Wholehearted for Hospice golf outing coming up on the 3rd of June. And it's like all other years, it's going to be a great event. And we're sold out of our sponsorships, but we have dinners and other auction items and stuff available. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. It's a great event every year. Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask Mr. Kurlinkus for an update on our efforts to get a bill from the sheriff's attorney.
Mr. Kurlinkus.
I spoke with Mr. Eckel by phone yesterday and informed him that we were expecting those. He said the bills are difficult to put together. He's trying to do that, and we'll forward them when they're ready.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments by board members? Mrs. Grohl.
Dorothy forgot one part on this, and this is the first ever State of Illinois Trauma Informed Awareness Day. It's trauma. We have so much trauma going around us that we have, gosh, there had to be, 20 different non-for-profits engaged in this, and the hospitals, because we are becoming a trauma center, and you should be very proud that Dr. Martell has headed this, and it's for all of Winnebago County. And be aware of, please, about the trauma that is going on in our community, especially with our young people, and then we wonder why they go astray. We should all be involved in this type of education. They are doing a lot of educating, even with the schools, on how to recognize the trauma in young children and see if we can't stop some of the problems that we have with them as they go on in their lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Dr. Martell does a great job with that. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, we'll move on to the chairman's report. I got several items, but I'm going to go fast as I can go. The position of chairman between the election 2020 to 2024, here's what I'm hearing from the community is a call for there to be clarity around what the position may or may not be, because there's been some board members who have made statements around moving the chairmanship inside the board at the next election, and some have made the comment about leaving it outside the board, others changing it. Whatever the case may be, I just have been asked to bring to the board's attention the need to the community, the county, and any potential candidates of interest to be clear on what you believe the future will be between 20 and 24. I'll leave it at that and let you all talk amongst yourselves to figure that out, and then handle it the way that the board's going to handle that. But I did want to pass along that request that I am hearing from a multitude of folks. The other item B is the discussion around November 2020 ballot question related to the county executive non-home rule ballot question, asking the community about the position of chairman long-term. If there would be, that would be on the ballot in 2020 of November, and if it would be passed by the community, if those two things would happen, it would not take effect to 2024. That is why I mentioned the first thing first is to be clear with the community about what the next 4 years post-election would look like. But I did want to follow up on this county executive referendum. There's been a few questions. There's two ways to do it. I'm going to strongly say this is what I'll be bringing forward, what I'll be talking in the community about, is the idea that it is a county executive, and in parentheses, non-home rule. We are not having two discussions, we're having one. It's about the idea of a state statuted set of duties for the future chairman if the community would choose it, and it would not be a discussion on home rule. That becomes a convoluted dual discussion, and we want to separate those out and not let that become a poison pill or a distraction in a discussion about county government structure. Item C, census. In the coming months, there's going to be more discussion about the future census discussion. I owe a follow-up internally around some discussions that'll be, I'm sure, brought to the board here in the near future. Just want to kind of put that on your radar. It's not a now thing, but it'll be a discussion in the coming weeks and months. Item D is this, I know it's been brought up before, but I really would just ask the board to take a hard look and ask the administration to bring forward thoughts around upgrading significantly the county website. We are going into a sword fight with a toothpick when it comes to communicating with our community, and I think our department heads have a really good story to tell, but it's really hard for them to navigate the back end of our website. The front end's one side, but it's the back end that needs to really be upgraded. We need to potentially have that discussion in the budget process around spending a few bucks to upgrade our most important communication tool to the community. The next item quickly is, I'm going to pass around, I didn't mean to not get this on your desk here before the meeting. I was asked to put together a list of, obviously, our standing board committees, subcommittees, ad hoc in work groups, in any of our caucuses, because there's been some new additions, and what I'm seeing, and this is a draft, so if something's wrong on it, then send me an email, we'll correct it so we all have a working list. What we started with was 11 between committees, subcommittees, and caucuses. We started going into 2019 with like 11. I think we're up to 20 different groups, and I just want to make sure we're all seeing them, because some of them are as a result of productive discussions in one or more committees, and I just want to see the whole group. So I'm sharing this as a draft. If and when you see an error on my part, let's correct it, agree on it, and then make sure we have a working list. It's the board's groups, not mine or not the administration's. I just want to make sure we see the collective, and when we're okay with it, it'll be on the website. So I'll get that around to you for your review, and then send me any thoughts in the next week or two. The next thing, I want to also thank Dr. Martell from our health department. She helped organize a community-wide opioid summit today. It was out at the University of College of Medicine, and it had a lot of our medical folks talking about medication as it relates to the opioid epidemic, and she did a great job with that. I had on my list, if there's any updates from anybody, and I know Dr. Martell is not here, she's having discussions with the landfill, but the one thing I believe she asked in the last committee update was that please do not have direct discussions around positions or future movement related to the landfill right now, because she's having some of them, and she wants to keep the communication with Mr. McDonald's committee regular and flowing. But if you have questions, please drive them to her, and then because she's in a more of regular communication. We're trying to look at a number of issues at one time. That way we don't send a dual message to the landfill. So if you have any concerns with that, please follow up with me or her at any time, and we'll make sure we keep moving this discussion forward. Lastly, hazard mitigation plan. I think that came up with Mr. Vanderwerth in the last this meeting or board meeting or something. I know it was a discussion with Mr. McDonald. This was a hot topic. We need to update our hazard mitigation plan, and I know McChesney Park needs us to do that in a timely manner for, I believe, a grant that they're chasing. And so there's going to be a solution coming forward, and I just want to put the zoning, the Public Works Committee, and maybe Operations on notice. You're going to get a solution coming forward, I think, from Mr. Vanderwerth. I don't have a whole lot of details, but I think there's a plan on a go forward on how to update our existing plan. So look for more information in the very near future. With that, that's all I had tonight, and we'll move on to announcements and communications. Clerk Gumow.
Mr. Chairman, the items listed below were received as correspondence.
And we'll place those on file. Next item of business, our consent agenda. May I please have a motion to approve our consent agenda, which has 4 items: the raffle report, the bills, the approval of the April 25 meeting minutes, and the layover of the May 9 meeting minutes. May I please have a motion? Motion by Mr. Hoffman. May I have a second? Second by Mrs. Crosby. Item is now before the board. It's the consent agenda A through D. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item of business, County Administrator's Report. Carla.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to give a brief financial update. I went into depth at the committee meeting on Thursday. Overall, we are operating in deficit positions in both the general fund and the public safety sales tax fund through March 31st of 2019, primarily due to the fact that we have to make our debt service transfers by the end of February each year. So those transfers have been made, however, they relate to the full fiscal year, not just the 6 months that we're presenting. We started out strong with our state revenues, and in the last few months, they've dropped off and are lagging a little bit behind the prior year. So we'll keep watching that, keep you informed. We usually like to have 6 or 7 months before we project out where we think we'll land at the end of the fiscal year. Unfortunately, the state tends to be about 3 months behind in those revenues, which really hinders our ability to project out through the end of the year. You will also see in our intergovernmental revenues, they're lagging behind budget because we have several contracts through the sheriff's office that include reimbursements for IMRF and FICA. And after looking closely at these contracts, because those are levy funds, we determined in our finance department that we need to record those reimbursements in those funds that are levying the taxes for those expenditures. Also lagging behind are charges for services because the inmate tablet revenue that used to be deposited in the general fund is now, since January of 2019, is being deposited in the commissary fund. We'll have to address that with some shifting of expenditures in fiscal year 2020. And then licenses and permits are at 29%, primarily due to the cyclical nature of these revenues. We generally see these come in mainly late spring, summer, and early fall. We've had some vacancies in different departments. It's included in the memo that I sent with the financial reports through email. So that would cause us to be under budget in those departments. And then our health insurance so far, knock on wood, is at 45%, so we're hoping that that trend continues. We've had a few large claims, so I'm not sure what we'll see in the next few months, but should we be under budget in that area, that should help fund some of the shortages we have. And then I also gave you the health insurance fund. That is the central fund for accounting for health insurance, and again, that is actually overall below budget, but that's our central fund. We're hoping that within the actual departments and then at year end, we'll end up below budget. Also in your packet, I each quarter give you a comparison of our major revenue streams in the general fund and the public safety sales tax fund for the current year back to fiscal year 2014. So that gives you some good history to see where we are compared to prior years.
Can I ask I apologize,
Yes.
can I ask a follow-up on the sales tax?
Sure.
Projected versus what we're seeing, you're not seeing anything that's concerning you related to sales tax revenue so far this year? Just so I'm clear.
We're a little under
Okay.
budget. We're at, in the trends, I give you what the percentage is year to date and what we would have as a target. So we're a little bit behind year to date.
Just one more financial follow-up, and if it's not something for tonight, we could follow up. Host fee revenue, are we, any concerns on that front in terms of what we received year to date?
We are now into the new contract because they're into the new site. So the dollars per tonnage goes down, so we would anticipate that it would level off, our revenue would level off. However, the volume's been up, so we need another quarter of revenue to see where we're going to land on a quarterly basis. The last check that we received had part of the old site and then part of the new site included in it, so it'll really tell in the next quarter where we're going to be on a quarterly basis.
Thank you.
I also, if you read the paper today, there was an article regarding the Baker-Tilly study that was done on HR and finance. I left on your desk a memo of the timeline of that study and how the recommendations have been handled. I think it's not a fair oversight of how our HR and finance departments are operating. We've made good progress in those departments. These reports include only findings. They don't include the accomplishments that we've made, and it was issued in August of 2018. We've made good strides since then. If you were in attendance when our Baker Tilly presented our external audit for fiscal year 18, there were very positive comments about the leadership in our departments and administration here at Winnebago County. We continue to make progress. There's a lot to do. Like every other department, we're very short-staffed, and when we open up a box, it seems like there's 3 more boxes hidden inside, so we try to deal with things as we can, but we want to make sure that we get the structure right before we move on to another project. So I want to thank all the department heads for the hard work they do. They struggle on a daily basis to get the work done with the amount of people they have in their department, and I'm really appreciative of all the work they do, and I hope the board is as well. Lastly, I met with the project manager representatives today. They've got a really good plan for phase 1. They plan to meet with all of the stakeholders in the project, and they plan on spending a good amount of time with them, giving them a questionnaire to answer before the discussion, and they plan to spend about 2 to 3 hours with each of them to make sure that we get the project designed in the way that accommodates as much as possible with our budget, everyone's wishes. We had originally been talking about a budget of $9 million. I communicated to them it might be wishful thinking, but based on their conversations throughout this process, we'd like to hit a budget of about $5 to $6 million. So that's their goal going forward. Whether or not we'll meet it or not, that's to be seen in the future. But I think we're looking at a different direction, not just demolition, but repurposing the building or possibly looking into parking decks. So we'll be surveying the board as time goes on, as they gather more information and see what the interest of the board is so that they can focus on where they're headed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item of business, department. Oh, we see several hands up. Sorry about that. Start in the front. I don't know who is first. Mrs. Crosby.
Okay. Thank you, Carla, for your update. Very informative. On the Baker Tilly report, you know, there's a lot of stuff in there, and the implementation cannot be done simultaneously because it's just overwhelming. But what do you think would be the priority items that would need to be addressed first?
Baker Tilly laid out some priority items. Because we did not release the report, Kim's very new to seeing it, and we have HR issues that we need to address very timely. We had discussed the compensatory time in the Personnel and Policies Committee recently in February. Really shortly after that period of time, Kim had left on her vacation and then had a family emergency, so we haven't gone back to that. I feel that's very priority. We may be allowing employees to take time off that they're really not entitled to, or employees are entitled to time that they're not able to take. So I think that's high on our list. We have the structure all ready to go. We just need HR to identify for us which employees are eligible for comp time, and then have them input the information, and we'll then start implementing it on a payroll-to-payroll basis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just to follow up to that question, because I think it's connected, what areas have we made progress in?
We're actually going to have a meeting next Thursday for the Personnel and Policies Committee. I'm working with Kim and Molly on Tuesday. We're going to spend a half a day going through that so that we can define that very clearly for the committee. And then we're meeting with Baker Tilly on Wednesday morning so that Kim can hear firsthand what the issues are from their perspective, and then we can develop a plan to address those issues that we haven't already begun.
Thank you. I guess where I was going is I know Munis has been an area of, I know it was mentioned in the report, but I also remember us talking about that
They
several times.
they discussed the underutilization of munis. We've made great progress in that area. We've established electronic workflows. Our payroll requisition process went from a very paper-based process, and now that is fully automated. We've developed some workflows in the PO and requisition process for accounts payable. Ann has started the vendor self-serve where they actually sign up electronically for us to establish them as a vendor. So we're well underway in different processes. Part of our annual fee with Munis, we have paid them for additional training. We pay for a block, and they've gone through the payroll process with us to establish where we need to make improvements. They're working on that right now, and then our next step will be the AP process.
Thank you. Next hand up, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Carla, just curious, you mentioned the sheriff's tablets revenues no longer going to the general fund, instead it's going to the commissary. Do you happen to know why that is?
I prefer that Mr. Carter address that. I'm not sure exactly why they did that. I think it was related to some state information, but we didn't receive that same information.
Could somebody speak to that, or?
I can get back to Mr. McDonald on that, and I'll look into it.
Okay, thank you. And if we get looped in on that, we can just push it out to everybody. Thank you very much, Mr. Carner. Anything else, Mr. McDonald? Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Pascal, I think the one thing I'm concerned about, both from reading the memo and from reading the Baker-Tilly report, is the 9-month gap between when this was released and when it was presented to the board. I mean, I can see here at the end of 2018, there were attempts to, you asked the chairman about releasing this report, and they say here that that was denied. I'm questioning, during that time, did you start to develop a strategic plan to address these top 10 high-priority issues?
We did address some of them, no, not all of them. It would be impossible to address all of them.
I'm not talking about the issues themselves. Did you formulate a plan and a timeline to start addressing the issues during that time period?
Yes, we did.
Did you share, at what point?
The chairman and I had discussions regarding the
No,
report
I'm
on
not talking about
multiple
discussions
occasions.
though, but an actual plan.
Yes, I worked with the department heads, and we were working on certain issues.
So then after January 24th, when everything changed, we had about a 6-week period when our HR director was still here. Why during that time did you not inform the board about these findings?
I was placed in a very uncomfortable position to have a report kept back for that long a period of time. And I think everyone knows that that was a very difficult time for everyone.
I mean, I understand it was a difficult time, but I mean, there are certain items on here in which you were fully staffed that require some immediate response to, if not at least an immediate plan to address. And understanding that we've been put at legal liability for some of these, for example, OSHA requirements, FMLA. It's been 9 months.
There has been progress in those
No,
areas.
I'm not saying that progress hasn't been made. Again, I'm just concerned that, all of a sudden, we have this report that came out 9 months ago. There is a flurry of activity now, which I most certainly appreciate, but I wonder, had this not come out on last Friday when it did, if we'd be having these conversations.
They were being addressed.
Again, I'm not saying they're not being addressed, I'm saying why were we not informed?
I would ask you to direct that question to the chairman as well.
Well, I mean, we have given you the leadership and authority for the last 6 months in this county. The last thing I want to hear from my administrator is someone passing the buck.
I am not passing the buck.
I would expect you to take accountability for what we see here. More importantly, this has been 9 months. We still don't actually, none of us have actually seen a plan. And the next question I have is, Mr. Fiducia, you talked about this on the beginning of the committee meetings on Thursday. Did you receive this report before everybody else?
I received the reports, I believe it was on that Thursday. My Marilyn Height Ross gave me a copy of that report, and that's the first time that I saw that report, and as soon as I had that, I mentioned it at Policies of Personnel, and I believe that it was put on the website immediately after that.
And I would appreciate that you did do that. I guess I'm curious where the state's attorney got it from.
The state's attorney requested it from me, and I provided it to them.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is disturbing to me. These are some high-priority issues, and like any high-priority issues that affect the finances and the legal standing of this county, we need to have plans be drawn up right away. These things can't sit around in a limbo standpoint until someone decides to bring them up, right? When something like this comes in, whether it's an audit, whether it's a study that affects the legal standing of this county, whether it affects the department heads or HR policies, this board has to know right away. I don't care what else we have going on. We are fully capable of walking and chewing gum, and this sort of delay on these kinds of information is absolutely unacceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. To follow that up, we've had other reports. Could we just, for clarity in the room, speak to how we've, I guess, shared reports around animal services or River Bluff when there's been reviews, just so we're clear in the room about how any of those processes were alike or different? Carla, and I'm just asking Carla, is there a difference or anything related to other reviews we've done that are similar?
I've shared the reports that have come from Generations at River Bluff. We discussed the Best Friends report. I think it was shared at some point. I can't recall any other reports.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just getting back to the financial report part of it, just for clarity and for just a summary of where we find ourselves, as I listen to what you're saying, I'm hearing that we're generally relatively okay. We have some savings in the health insurance side that's going to help us with some of our expenditures. We also have some questions about revenue, but we don't have enough information to have a clear conclusion about that. But I do want to make sure that I'm understanding our general context, where we opened the year with between the two funds, the general fund and the public safety tax, $2.5 million deficit budget. And then in the offline conversation I had with you, Carla, where I wasn't able to attend the finance meeting, and so you were kind enough to catch me up on some of the details. We also have a deficit beyond that we're experiencing, and I'm just wondering, is that clear? Is that true? I mean, has somehow the $2.5 million been sopped up and corrected, or are we still there plus a little bit more? Could you comment on that?
Right now, I would expect that we would operate at a deficit of around that $2.5 million, the two funds combined. We also have some unbudgeted, 24 unbudgeted deputies included, but that would be included in the $2.5 million deficit.
Okay, so it's not in addition to the $2.5 million?
No.
And is the health insurance savings just getting us to that $2.5 million savings, or is that potentially going to reduce that $2.5 million deficit?
I expect it to be somewhere around that $2.5 million, standing things as they are right now.
Okay,
I'm
thank you.
hoping that revenue doesn't start a trend of being lower than last year, because that's not what we budgeted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schultz. I don't know who is first. I'll go to Mrs. Gorel, then Mr. Westcott. Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you. I want to direct this to Mr. Fellers. Mr. Fellers, why didn't you question the chairman on why it sat on his desk for 4 months? And then after it was supposed to be passed on, did he release it to get passed on to the administrator? I think the whole thing from the beginning has been held from us, when we should have had it day one when it started at the beginning of the 9 months. I have found other things from way back last year too that never got brought up to us until it was too late or after the fact that we should have been acting on it. It's just like the thing with Loves Park. and that road and turnaround out there that was done in April, and we never got it till this year. There's been a lot of things that have been laid on the chairman's desk that never got beyond that. That was his responsibility first. And that's why we had to change things, because they weren't being brought forward the way they should. We talk about transparency, but whose transparency are we talking about? It sure isn't giving it to us as board members. We get these reports 9 months later. That's not transparency, and I'm really disgusted with it. I have never seen government run the way it is at this time. When those reports come through, we have always been notified of them up front, so we knew how to start acting on them and where we had to make our adjustments. We can go ahead and make adjustments, but it has to be at the beginning, not halfway through. Those strategic plans, I want to see the strategic plans that we went to these meetings. I want to see them in action. I've heard them talked about. I still have to see them in action. I don't call that transparency. And I'm saying this problem we have right now started at the beginning, not 9 months later. Thank you.
Since you addressed me, Mrs. Grohl,
Yes.
I'll respond. Started at the beginning of what?
When the report was laid on your desk.
That's not when any of these issues began, ma'am.
That's when they should start being.
Excuse me, Mrs. Grohl, I'll come back to you. So I didn't come here this evening to fight at all. I did not do that, and I don't want to relitigate the past. As I said in the paper very clearly, is that on August 3rd, we received a report. If I could go back in time, I would have forwarded it. However, as I asked the question a few minutes ago, how have we handled other reports, such as the Care for Pets report, things I've seen with River Bluff, ongoing and other things. I know the courts are doing a review right now. Typically, my experience, watching how we've handled other reviews, is that when reports come in, there is a time for professional staff to work with professional staff to develop plans for the future, and then they bring forward the report and action items. There was never a time where that was discouraged in terms of those communications happening. The only thing I said was that since we're getting this report in August, let's get through the budget season, which we were hot and heavy on, and then we'll have the discussions. There was no other attempts that I can recall whatsoever that would have prevented discussions in any way, shape, or form around that plan. And I'm sorry if there's anything past that, and what I said that's in the paper is what I'm saying to you right now. But at the same time, these issues in the report are part of other reports where we're getting better and looking at real issues. And I think we've made progress on that, and I think there's a lot of people that should be proud of that. I would take exception to some spirit of not working, sharing information, and I gotta be honest with you, because we've had plenty of time to reflect. I have no idea what you're talking about with not sharing information when it comes to anything with Loves Park. So we can have that discussion in committee all day long, twice on Sunday, but that's fundamentally not how I recall those conversations going. And I say that with all due respect because I have the highest regard for you.
May I?
Yeah, I have a follow-up, Mrs.
First of
Grohl.
all, thank you. I directed my comment to Mr. Fellers to start with, because he is blaming the future. He's not blaming anything on the past. And we're all ties together. It goes back to square one. And that's where the problem starts, at square one. And if it's not handled then and brought forward, then we do have a problem. But it's all our problem. It's not just the administrators' problem. It's all of our problem for not being on top of this from square one. And we have not been there. Thank you.
Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chairman. Carla, may I ask the question, how many people do we have in our HR department?
5.
And how many of them are certified HR representatives?
I don't think any,
None?
not that I know of.
I see that as being a problem. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. I'm sorry, I don't know who, Mr. Hoffman. It was a tie. It was a tie. Mr. Hoffman, then Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. I know this is going to be hard to believe, but I'm kind of like a peacemaker here. I think we got to quit badgering each other, things in the past. start working towards a future. Mr. Fellers has lately been taking on the role of the attorney for the board and interrogating people. I don't know why he's doing that. We should be helping each other, giving a hand up, and not pushing everybody down all the time. So I would appreciate it if we quit living in the past and start living in the present and in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. I've noticed on the memo that the Personnel and Policies Committee was at least made aware of it and discussed it in February of 2019. I don't know if it was discussed or brought up in caucus, but some members of the board were aware of this report in February. The other thing that I have a question on, a lot of my questions were answered so far. Petty cash policy was brought up in the Baker-Tilly report as being a high priority. Has there been progress made in the petty cash policies, development of policies?
Can I address your first comment first,
Carla.
please? The issue regarding comp time was discussed in the Personnel and Policies Committee, not the report.
I see. Okay, that clears it up. Thank you.
The county auditor has been reviewing receipts in the various elected office and departments, and they have issued reports regarding those. We do not have a policy related to petty cash. That's a very, very small dollar amount. The real risk is surrounding the receipts that come in, and that the controls surrounding those are strong. And we had good results regarding our internal controls when Baker-Tilly did our external audit.
Good, very good. Yeah, due to our history, I think it's important that we get that established as soon as possible. And also, we'd be able to monitor our progress, what progress has been made, just through the Munis system as it is, I believe, as well, right?
I would like to detail that out for you in writing, but we have made significant progress in the payroll, and we're now beginning in the accounts payable area. We've made some progress in purchasing as well.
Very good.
We are utilizing the system far more than we did when I first started in 2017.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. Follow-up, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to respond to Ms. Gorel here. Ms. Gorel, you are correct. I think the chairman absolutely should have delivered this to him. I did not bring him up because, as he mentioned in the article, he took responsibility for not sharing this with us. I think, and that's my biggest problem on this, is that I read this report and I read this memo and I hear a lot of excuses and how other people were involved. I hear no leadership and no accountability. Mr. Fiducia, I think you had the best quote about this. You said, you've been down here a long time, the place has always been like that. There have always been no consequences. I think it's time that we have some consequences around here for our administration not living up to their roles. They are professional staff, they have a duty to perform, and if we're not holding them to the highest standard, then we're not doing our job either.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Webster.
Yeah, thank you. I've been listening to all of this, and some of it's kind of crazy. Something Fred just brought up, though, about having certified HR personnel. We had one, the way of Karen Fury, and for reasons at least unknown to me, she was dismissed by the administrator. by the chairman, correct? Now, that was the person that would have been on top of this. She was the one that was certified to do that sort of thing. The things that this report is outlining, that we were deficit in taking care of some of these issues, that was her job. She was the one educated to do that sort of thing, okay? So had she still been on board, perhaps none of this would have ever happened. And I find it kind of odd that, once again, this information was not disseminated to us in a timely fashion. So now, Mr. Fellers, for some reason, wants to attack the administrator. I can tell you this, I will tell all of you this. Since we made that ordinance change, the one that has been so talked about taking the power away from one person and giving it to another. Since that change has happened, there's been an information highway almost nonstop coming from the administrator's office. We're getting information, we're getting emails like on a daily basis. When it happens, we hear about it. Nothing is held back from us. So when this was, before it was released to us, and the administrator, before the ordinance change was made, the administrator was told to just sit on this for a while. So we can't blame the administrator for things that happened in that period there. She was not allowed to have a free hand to disseminate this information to us. And so when I think about it and I look back on this, once again, since the ordinance change, we've had a free flow of information, and it's gone both ways, okay? We've had a free flow, all right? Is it any wonder when things like this come up, and things that Angie has brought up there too, is it any wonder why we made those ordinance changes? It's pretty obvious, the reasons that we did that. I'm glad that we did. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Any other comments by board members before I go back to Mr. Hoffman, and I will. To be clear, this is starting to sound like a discussion about something else. The issues that were discussed under the county administrator's report, finance update, and the mention of the Baker-Tilly report, if we want to relitigate the ordinance changes, there's going to be plenty of time for that in the very near future. But I would also say, very clear, that I am not aware of anything outside of asking the administrator to hold on the report in terms of a board report out until after the budget, which began October 1st. I'm not aware of any other things that inhibited any flow of information. So I can't speak to a lot of what I'm hearing here, but it does sound more about other issues than about this issue, and I'm sorry for that because I didn't show up here to fight tonight. Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, this is one that I read in the article that I've been talking about since I've been on the county board, is about the transparency in requesting time off and comp time and unpaid vacations and then getting paid off for vacation time. I have talked about that problem since I've been on the board. I knew it was a problem when I worked for the county. I seen it happen. I seen people that took their vacation time and yet they would have tons of vacation time to get paid off for. And I brought up this problem because I had heard it from people that had been in the county a long time, said they'd heard of people say, oh, go ahead, take your vacation, and then just don't put it down. I've heard this, I reported this to HR, to the very person we're talking about. And all I got out of it was, well, we can't do anything about it. What do you mean you can't do anything about it? The county's paying out money that people are getting under fraudulent terms, and we're saying we can't do anything about it. That, to me, is the biggest thing I took out of that article in the paper today. And I have spoke about it before this ever happened. This has been an ongoing problem for years. So if you want to look at one thing we need to deal with, that's it.
Mr. Hoffman, when did you retire, if you don't mind me asking? Retire as a county employee?
2008.
Okay. So then it's safe to say we're addressing a legacy issue. Thank you. I'll go back to Mr. Fellers one last time. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Senator Butler. Mr. Hoffman, I'm sorry, I was concerned there. You mentioned that we were talking about somebody. Who are we talking about? I don't remember anyone in any department being specifically called out for performance here. We're talking about departments and policies.
You're kind of mushy, I didn't hear
You said the person that we are talking about, in regards to the HR department, what person are we talking about? Because this report doesn't address any people, it addresses policies and practices.
Compounder.
Thank you.
Mrs. Squirrel.
I believe thank you, Chairman. I believe that's why we went through and changed the policy, that either you use it or you lose it. We went through that, 2 years ago? that we passed that ordinance. 5 years ago, we went through that. So actually, that should be a new point now. That shouldn't even be happening because of the policy we did pass. And so people had to take their vacation time. We had charts of how many people had it sitting on an account in their department. They had to use it by a certain period of time. All our new hires now, for 1 year, if they don't use what they have coming to them, that means they don't get it. And we have changed that policy, and that needs to be noted. That has been addressed. With Jim, I just want one correction with Jim. When he was talking about her, he actually should have been talking about him, because we did have a person who did hold a certificate for HR. And at the time when the new administration came in, I believe he resigned or he was asked to leave. I don't know the particulars of it, but he was the one who held the certificate, which left us without an HR person who was certified. And that's where that problem started. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorham. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we should put this to bed right now. And the reason I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, we didn't come here to fight or air our laundry right now, but I believe that all intents and purposes that we are going to have a policies and personnel meeting on Thursday, and I believe that anybody on this board that wants to attend that meeting should do so. And if you have any concerns, you could get them to us in writing, so that way we're going to make sure that we address them. And I think this is something that we need to govern forward. We're living in the past right now. We need to go forward and govern the best we can. And I think it's time we stop pointing the fingers. And yes, I was upset when I saw that this report was given to us in August, but there was reasons why it was brought to my attention. But I think that we need to go forward, and I would like everybody to address this issue at the next Personnel and Policies meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Any other board member comments? Thank you very much, and thank you, Carla, for your report. Next item of business, department head updates. We got a quick tax bill update from Mr. Hodges. Tom?
Thank you, Chairman. The 2018 Winnebago property taxes payable 2019 were posted on the county's website this past Monday, May 20th. I've spoken with the treasurer's office, and they've informed me that the tax bills are being printed and will be mailed out next week, with a first installment due date of June 28th. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the follow-up. Any questions for Mr. Hodges? I know this got a bit of media attention with the delay with the county and the state. Any follow-up? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here tonight. Next item of business, standing committee reports, our Finance Committee, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try to be brief as possible. There is no actions tonight, but I do want to address the thunder that was kind of taken under the wings here by Carla and her memo. I've gotten a lot of also calls, response from this report that we got from the HR and obviously the finance internal body. So I'd like to clarify and give this to the public. Most importantly, what was left out was, from the article, was if, and I think Mr. Isaac Guerrero was in the room at the time when Baker Tilly did the external audit. We got an unqualified opinion, and there was one minor finding in that report out of all the things. Now, that's our whole county as a whole, saying that great news came out of it. Staff was great. Potentially, they cleared out some of the things in the past. But I also want to reiterate I'm glad that we have these discussions. This is why we do these reports. We ask Baker Tilly to be our consultant, to go internally to our departments to do these efficiency reports. So I do appreciate, I think it's great conversation. It's an ongoing process to try to clear out the waters there that we have, that obviously we may have some control issues in hand. Just like we have the presentation that they did at our last Finance Committee with our IT department, our capital expenditures and potential list that we have out there. They're going to vet it. It was presented, the scope, the work that's going to be presented. I am upset as well with the reporting of it 9 months down the road, being left out of the black here and out of the light here, so to say, from that aspect of it. So I do think it's good. I'm glad Mr. Isaac Guerrero brought up the issues that obviously potentially are alarming, but I can assure the public and the county that there isn't anything alarming that financially fraudulently that's going to occur here. Are there control deficiencies? Potentially, yes. This is why we did this feasibility study and this efficiency study. And we continue to do so with the IT department and throughout the county as well. And we tried with the sheriff, potentially, we'll see what happens. We did the lean process. We're doing those things because there are things internally that are wasteful that we can reduce. This is why we're here. That's why we're trying to do. But at the same time, we got to understand that I can't dictate on how things should operate on a day-to-day basis. I'm not the county administrator. I'm not the sheriff. He was elected. Those are the things that we have to think about. And I'm glad that we're having this discussion, but I just want to be crystal clear here to the public, for those that read the article that may be taking, oh, there's all this dysfunction happening, there's all these things that are occurring in the county. I'm just telling you, look at the external audit to figure out what happened there. We have an unqualified opinion. We have one minor finding. Everything is good. Now, can we work internally and house clean? Absolutely, we can. And there's topics that we've discussed here, but I just want to reiterate, because it gets thrown one direction, and we all go in one direction, and we all jump in. We have these discussions. Please get involved in the Finance Committee. Get involved in these committees to make changes potentially, or create policies that are going to create these efficiencies. So I just want to address that publicly here tonight, because I've gotten phone calls from individuals, and then once I explained the whole situation, oh, that makes sense. I guess you guys are doing housekeeping inside, cleaning your house, your messes that you currently have. But on the outside, everything's good. Now, could there potentially be issues? Absolutely. But I can tell you and assure you that we're moving in the right direction. And yes, there was a delay, whatever it is, we all have excuses. You know, whatever it is, like for example, the strategic plan that I've been so constantly saying, where are our core values, which has nothing to do with the situation, the way it was brought about. There's certain things that happen throughout the process. Things happen. And I'm not justifying or giving excuses why this report came out 9 months later. But all I'm saying is, we're there, we're making progress, we're going to continue with IT, we're going to continue with different other departments to see what those efficiencies are, and we continue to do so. That's what I want to address, and I thank you for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado. Next item of business, Zoning Committee, Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Salgado, for putting the right spin on that. It's not a spin, actually, but you put things into context. So comparing that report is like you go to get your oil changed in your car, they do that 27-point check or whatever. They pick your car up, they say, yeah, it's running good, but you know what? You're going to need some tires before long. You might want to address that. You're going to need some wiper blades before long. You know, there's some other issues you should probably take care of, but your car is okay, it's running good. And that's kind of the way that I looked at that report there, actually. So, at any rate, on with the zoning. We have a number of items on the agenda here tonight. The first is, to be voted on, is Z0219. That's map amendment to a rezone plus minus 3.93 acres. And this is read in at the meeting a month ago now. Then it was laid over, and now it's before us again for a vote. And this came with ZBA denial and zoning committee denial. I would move to approve.
We got a motion by Mr. Webster on Z0219, map amendment to rezone. May I have a second? I have a second by Mrs. Gorel, so we have a motion, a second. Item 1, Z0219 is before the board. Any discussion by board members?
Might I interrupt one minute?
Yes, Mr. Webster.
I have to remind you that I will be abstaining on the vote or any discussion on this particular item.
So we'll note Mr. Webster's abstention. Any other comments, questions by board members? Mrs. Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you just give the rationale for denial?
As I said, I'm going to abstain, so perhaps another committee member, maybe Mr. Schultz, or refer it to Mr. Krupp, and they can answer any questions.
With, if it's okay, we'll start with Troy, and then if any board members would like to dot i's, cross t's, throw your hand up and I'll call on you. Troy?
Thank you. I believe the main reason was the inconsistency with the 2030 land use plan, the high LISA score, and also the inconsistencies with the surrounding zonings.
Thank you, sir. Any follow-up by board members on that?
That's good.
We're good? Okay. So we have a motion, a second on Z0219, which is number 1 under zoning. I see no further discussion. All those or actually probably, let's do a roll call on this, just because I anticipate some no's. The motion is to approve Z0219, a map amendment to rezone.
Thank you. Mr. Tassoni?
No.
Mr. Webster is abstaining. Mr. Westcott?
No.
Mr. Arena?
No.
Mr. Billich?
No.
Mr. Boomer? Mr. Booker?
No.
Mr. Butita? Absent. Mrs. Crosby?
No.
Mr. Fellers?
No.
Mr. Fiducia?
No.
Mr. Girl is absent. Mrs. Gorel?
No.
Mr. Hoffman?
No.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Mr. McDonald?
No.
Mr. Neighbors?
No.
Mrs. Red?
No.
Mr. Salgado?
No.
Mr. Schultz? All nays, Mr. Chairman.
We probably could have done that in reverse and said, is anybody for it? My apologies to the board. Motion fails unanimously. Mr. Webster.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 2, Z0419. This is in for the first reading, but I did get an email from the applicant's attorney requesting that we suspend on this one this evening. This came from Zoning Board of Appeals with unanimous approval. Likewise, from Zoning Committee, unanimous approval. County Board District 4. It is consistent with the land use map. And I would move to suspend.
We got a motion by Mr. Webster to suspend the rules on Z0419. May I have a second? Second by Mr. Westcott. Item is now before the board. The motion is second to suspend the rules. All those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We've suspended the rules. Thank you very much. Mr. Webster.
Okay, then I would move to approve Z0419.
We got a motion by Mr. Webster on Z0419, map amendment to rezone. May I have a second? Mr. Fellers, thank you. Item is now before the board. Any discussion by board members on item 2, Z0419? Yes, sir. Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we just get a brief explanation of what this is about?
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Mr. Webster, or do you want me to go to Troy on this one?
Either. If you want, yeah, it's guy's going for a zoning change from ag priority to rural ag, and it is it's consistent with the land use map. It has a very low LISA score. got everything going for it, in other words, and once again, approval, unanimous approval out of both ZBA and zoning committee. Troy, you would like to, anything you want to add to that? Troy?
There's similar zonings also adjacent to the property as well.
Thank you.
You said there's similar zonings adjacent to the property.
Okay.
Thank you. So the motion and the second is on 00419, map amendment to rezone. Any other questions, comments by?
Thank you. The next two now are special uses. They both come with conditions, and so they're both in for a layover. The first one is, number 3 is SU 0419, and number 4 is SU 0319. Both in for layover with conditions.
Thank you.
Okay, and then finally, we have an ordinance to adopt certain fee schedule updates for building and planning and zoning permits and services, and zoning committee recommended approval 6-zip. And I would, really, I'd like to suspend on that one as well.
So you've read that in, and now you're making a motion to suspend the rules, which would allow us to vote on this ordinance to adopt certain fee schedule updates for building and planning. May I have a second on the motion to suspend? Thank you, Mr. Neighbors. Motion to suspend is now before the board. Any discussion by board members on the motion to suspend? Yes, sir, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just since we are updating the fees, do we want to give the public 2 weeks just to review what this is before we go ahead and push it through in case there are any comments? Or is it something that you think is an immediate need?
Well, I would suggest that we would move with this tonight. I mean, it's not, we're not having any drastic changes here, I don't believe. Mr. Dornbush likewise won't be here next time to explain it either. If Troy would like, if you got questions about it, you want to ask Troy.
I don't have any questions. I just, one of the reasons we lay these over for 2 weeks is that the public has time to comment. And since this is a fee change, even if it is not that significant, we should probably keep that unless this is something that we absolutely positively have to do tonight. Thank you.
So the motion and the second is to suspend the rules. A yes vote suspends the rules, a no vote would not, and then the item would lay over as it's been read in. So with that, are there any board members who are opposed? Show your hands. Any board members opposed to suspending the rules, please raise your hand. So I got a no vote for Mr. Fellers. I'm going to cast a yes vote for all other members present, so we're going to suspend the rules. And I'll give it back to Mr. Webster.
Thank you. I would move to approve the ordinance to adopt certain fee schedules.
We have a motion by Mr. Webster on item 5, the ordinance to adopt certain fee schedule updates for building and planning and zoning permits and services countywide. I got a second by Mr. Westcott. The item is now before the board. Any questions or comments? Yes, Mr. McDonald, and after Mr. McDonald's question, just in case he calls it or something, we'll have the fee schedule read in, just so it's on the record. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's exactly where I was going. Are these fees going up, and if so, by how much?
Most of them are quite minimal. We've had fees for building permits and so forth that were $30, and they're doubling. So, Troy, did Mr. Dornbush leave you some additional information on this fee schedule?
He's right there.
It's right there.
Oh, there's Chris, I'm sorry. Oh, you changed seats over there. Okay, Mr. Dornbush, you want to address this issue, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are just some minor tweaks. Radon mitigation is a new fee that we're putting in there because we're finding that new residential homes are requiring additional inspection out to the site. It's been required by the state since June 1st, 2013, but we're finding that we have to send an inspector out because of the timing of that. So they're going out there. So that would be a $30 additional fee for a new house permit that would go on top of it. A temporary certificate of occupancy, we've previously been charging $100. It's been that way since 2004. We're remaining at $100. However, the county auditor's office did an audit on our department, and we could not find the document establishing that fee, the ordinance or resolution, so we're just basically memorializing what we historically have had with that fee. We are doing a building verification letter. A lot of insurance companies with projects are requesting specific letters to specific sites, code inquiries. We have a generic letter, but the insurance companies want specific addresses with code interpretation, so we're putting, that's something new, and it's $50, which matches up with what we already charge for our zoning letters, so that just matches with that. And then for, we get inquiries about handicap accessibility ramps for residential use. A lot of volunteer programs or volunteer agencies will do these ramps at no cost to the person needing it. The materials are all donated. Typically, we might collect $110 for something like this. It does not come up often in our office. It is temporary. If the person doesn't need it anymore, moves out, they usually deconstruct those and reuse them at a different site or so forth. So instead of dragging out a project that's already essentially free by a couple of months by coming through the board process, we have it currently written that it's up to the building official to review it, make sure it's up to par for a voluntary project. And then there's 2 zoning updates. One is for commercial signs permits. It's going from, currently it's $30. We're going up to $45 because we found, since we did our overhaul fee schedule in 2016, that it's requiring an additional inspection to go out to site. So that $15 is supposed to help offset the cost of staff to go out there and do 2 inspections instead of 1. And then if work is started without a zoning permit, it's written in there that we can double the fee. Currently, we don't have any doubling the fees for zoning permits. We do for our zoning development applications. Typically, if it does not need a building permit, you're talking about a $30 fee. If it does need a building permit, we catch it, but if it's a fence, you do not need a fence. You don't need a building permit for a fence to be put up, or a driveway, you don't need a building permit, but you are required to have a zoning permit. So essentially, it would go from $30 to $60. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Dornbush, appreciate it. Any other follow-ups by board members, or any follow-ups, Mr. McDonald? Okay, thank you very much. So the item, again, is under zoning, item 5, the ordinance to adopt certain fee schedule updates. No other questions. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? A no vote for Mr. McDonald, yes vote for all other members present. Thank you very much. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to mention that the fee schedules are all in your packet. They are quite nominal, actually. We had a long discussion about this at the committee level, and in general, our fees are lower than most of the counties surrounding us. So, thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, Economic Development Committee, Mr. Westcott.
Your turn.
My turn. For Chairman to execute the documents necessary to complete a loan for $50,000 from the revolving loan fund to State Line Swiss Manufacturing LLC, and I so move.
We got a motion. Do you, just so I'm clear here, did you miss number 2? I apologize if I have it wrong, Mr. Westcott. Do you want to go to number 2, the $30,000 for the...
Oh, I just had them in the order which I was handing them.
No, I'm sorry, I apologize. I just want to make sure we've got the board aligned with your vote. So if it's okay with you, do you want to do the $30,000 for West Rock?
That's fine.
Okay, I apologize.
Okay, all right, and we have a resolution to provide $30,000 from the Winnebago County host fees to Rockford Park District Foundation for improvements of the West Rock Wake Park development, and I so move.
We got a motion by, thank you, Mr. Westcott on item 2, the West Rock, $30,000 from host fees. May I have a second, please? A second by Mr. Billick. Mrs. Red, who I believe brought that forward, so we got two on the second. Any discussion by board members? Mr. Webster.
Yes. As I recall, at our caucus meeting, we had quite a bit of discussion about any of these on here that were coming out of host fees. And I was under the impression we were gonna lay all of those over that had anything to do with host fees, because we had more concerns about them.
We only laid one of them over in that discussion that in committee.
So to be clear, the items on your list before you this evening, with the exception of number 5, which is the Great Neighborhoods Program, all are passed out of committee and before the board for action if it so chooses this evening. The specific item that's been motioned in is number 2, which is the West Rock for $30,000.
Correct.
Mr. Webster, any follow-up?
Yeah, I would move to lay them over.
We got a motion by Mr. Webster. The motion, if I understand it correctly, is it to lay over item 2 or to lay over item 2, 3, and 4?
Yes, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay, so the motion is to lay over items 2, 3, and 4 under economic development. And to be clear, that's the $30,000 for West Rock Wake Park. That would be the $50,000.
All of them.
Or excuse, 3 is a revolving loan, so a friendly amendment, Mr. Webster, would be 2 and 4, correct? Anything related to host fees that are before the
Correct,
board, is that
anything
correct?
related to host fees.
Sorry, my fault. So the motion by Mr. Westcott is to lay over, a motion by Mr. Westcott, or Mr. Webster, to lay over 2 and 4. Can I get a second on the layover? A second by Mr. Tassoni to lay over,
Move to separate.
okay, we got a motion and a second, and a move to separate the two, I'm assuming because certain people may want to vote one way for one and another for another. So are we okay? Can I have a second to separate and just vote on these issues separately? A second, thank you, Mr. Hoffman. We're going to separate out the motions to lay over. The first item, we're taking, oh, okay, all those in favor of separating out 2 and 4 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? We've separated out, we have a motion and a second to separate out and to lay over the 2 items, and they're now before the board. So the motion on item 2 is to lay over the resolution for $30,000 for West Rock. Any discussion on that particular item? Yes, Mrs. Gorel. We're only talking about laying over at this point.
Yes,
ma'am.
we're talking about laying it over, but you're asking about the discussion. I do think it really needs to be explained before you decide to lay it over. I don't think people realize that West Rock, that has the Wake Park, is an organization, it is a private industry, and what they're asking, do you want to explain this to the board of what it's all about?
Wish I could, but I could ask
And who can?
Mrs. Red.
Mrs. Red, could you give some background?
I'll try. We talked about this in committee, and this is in my district. And as you know, all of you know, my district gets very little. I wish you'd come out and look. Now, this park is trying to develop sitting space so that they can have more people there to come and make the park more viable and people will enjoy more. And in order to do this, they need money. So, I mean, I just can't see it. And this is part of our strategic plan, which we are not doing. This is the only park in the area, and it's at Levens Park. We helped the Wake Park out before, and now they need a little bit more help. They can't go directly to the Wake Park because they don't own the building. It's going to the foundation, and, you know, they'll distribute it that way. So I would encourage you to vote for this $30,000 tonight.
There's a motion and a second on the layover of item 2, the $30,000 for West Rock. I got a follow-up by, I'll go to Mrs. Grohl on a follow-up, and then we'll move to Mr. Fellers next.
That's the reason the money has to go to the Park Board District, is like Dorothy said, they need facilities out there so that they can sell hot dogs, so they can have bathroom facilities that are in working, operating, healthy conditions. If you've ever read about this park, you should see the amount of people who are come here from all over to do that zip line or whatever they call it. I'm not that familiar with it, but I do know that that particular park draws a lot of people, and the business itself is privately owned. And so all the Park District wants, and to go into their foundations enough money to upgrade the buildings that have been there forever, and I mean forever. I was there when I was a kid, that those buildings were there. And they do need to be updated so that we would have proper, healthy buildings there for the public to come to.
And this is at
It
Levings.
is a profit-making
I apologize.
organization. Thank you.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I didn't mean to cut you off. Is this at Levings Park? Yes. Okay, thank you. So the motion and the second is on the layover of this particular item, the $30,000 for West Rock. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would want to just echo Mr. Red's sentiments here and say that we should definitely do this tonight. This is really one of the true success stories of her district. These wake parks, if you want to wakeboard outside on a lake, you need an expensive boat, you need fuel, you need lots of equipment. They have set up lines that run across the lake that basically act like the power boat, and you can go back and forth all day. There aren't many of these, but people love to wakeboard. So people come from, not just from Illinois, but from Wisconsin, Iowa, Indiana, Michigan. They come from all over because these places don't really exist, and there's nothing else like it in the area. This is a part of town that doesn't get much tourist traffic at all, and this is one of those things. This is one of the few things that we've been able to help put out there that has really made a significant dent on that side of town, and I think we need to continue to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. I have Mrs. Crosby, then Mr. Arena, and then Mr. Tassoni in order. Mrs. Crosby.
I need a point of clarification, I guess. It was my understanding on the moratorium that it was for multi-year delegation of funds and not for this type of ask from the community. So, and do I have that wrong?
I can speak to that very, very quickly. You are correct. There's two different items. The moratorium is on multi-year. That doesn't mean that the board has to vote a particular way if an individual one-year item comes, but it is separate than a multi-year.
Thank you.
Am I saying that correctly, everybody? Okay. Thank you very much, Mrs. Crosby. Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so that I'm clear, this money is being used to improve the property owned by the Park District, or, okay. So is the Park District also contributing funds to improve their property?
Mrs. Redd?
Explain.
Hold Mrs. Grohl, Mrs. Grohl, 1 second. Do you have a follow-up on that, Mrs. Redd?
I hope they are, because 30,000 won't do very much.
So I understand why, you're working on this. I just have a lot of questions. It's not clear to me where the money is being spent, and I guess I have just a concern about us giving money to the Park District when the Park District is levying their own taxes. And I mean, there might be a very good reason for it, but, if I'm voting to lay it over, it's not necessarily that I don't support the project, it's just that I'm not completely clear on what's going on yet.
Thank you very much. The motion and second is to lay over the West Rock Wake Park $30,000 host fee. I think I had Mr. Tassoni, then Mr. Webster. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Should this discussion be pertaining to the layover, or will there be another time for discussion on the resolution?
If we vote to lay this item over, then that would conclude discussion this evening. If the vote to lay over fails, then we would bring forward for an official vote this evening.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, some of my questions would be, who else is participating in this? I mean, I understand, I'm knowledgeable about the Wake Park there. I do have reservations for giving more money to the Park District when we've gave literally tens of millions of dollars to them over the last 10 years. And I'd just like to know who other is partnership in the city, any nonprofits, Rockford Park District, and really, if anybody could just give me an explanation of what they're going to do with it. What's it for? No explanation of what they're actually going to do with that money.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tassoni. And with it's okay, I think Mrs. Redd could speak to that directly, if that's okay.
Please.
Mrs. Redd.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm working with the alderman in that area, and she is seeking funds to match if we decide to give. Also, planning on building a deck on that little house so where people can sit and eat their hot dogs and just enjoy the area. But I really encourage you guys to not lay this over and to vote tonight on this.
Thank you, Mrs. Redd. Mr. Webster.
Thank you. I'm glad the discussion came back to this. We got off the point of it there, of the layover to begin with, and Mr. Arena and Mr. Tassoni have kind of reeled us back in. And so that was my point on the layover there. I asked at caucus, is the Park District throwing some money in on this? Is the city of Rockford putting in some money on this? Are we the only ones on the hook for this? I like the project. I like the lake. I grew up fishing that little lake as well. I'm very familiar with it, so it has...
Hold on, Mr. Webster has the floor, and I just want to be able to hear him. Thank you, Mr. Webster.
And so, it's not about me not wanting to help you and your district, Dorothy, or to make things nice for the entire county. That's not the reason I wanted the layover. I wanted to find out for sure whether the city has some skin in the game and whether the Park District has some skin in the game, because they both have their own tax levy as well. And if it's equal, if it's a three-part deal, hey, I'm all on board for that. If everybody gives 30, then you got 90 to work with. You can do your deck, you can put a new roof on that thing as well, drill a new well. You need a water well over there. I'm good with all of that, but I just want to make sure that all the entities are involved and we're not the only ones that they go back to dipping in our well every time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Any other comments? The item is to lay over, whether or not to lay over the West Rock host fee give of $30,000. I don't see any other hands up, so a yes vote is to lay over, which means it would come back in 2 weeks to the board as a whole. It wouldn't go to committee, it would stay here at the board level and just come back in 2 weeks. Not to say you couldn't discuss it without action in a committee. A no vote would allow us to vote this evening. So with that, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll, and again, a yes vote is to lay over the item. Clerk Emma.
Mr. Webster? Yes. Mr. Westcott?
No.
Mr. Arena?
Yes.
Mr. Billich?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer? Mr. Booker?
No.
Mrs. Crosby?
No.
Mr. Fellers?
No.
Mr. Fiducia?
No.
Mrs. Gorel?
No.
Mr. Hoffman?
No.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors?
No.
Mrs. Redd?
No.
Mr. Salgado?
No.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Seven, 11. Nays? 7 to 11?
So we have 11 no votes on layover. The item does not lay over, it fails, so the item is before the board for action this evening. The second part of the pullout for layover, if I would move on with your okay, Mr. Westcott, is the motion to lay over the item 4. Item 4 is the $7,000 of host fees to the wall mural for downtown Rockford mural project related to the RACVB. A motion and a second has occurred. The motion is to lay over this item, which would bring it back in 2 weeks. Any discussion specific to the layover of the mural project itself? Yes, Mr. Fellers, did you have a hand up, Mr. Salgado? Oh, okay. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you. I do believe, coming out of committee, there was this expression that there is a time constraint on this, about the commitment and the spots that were available. Is that correct, Mr. Westcott?
Yes, it is. There is only 2 spots available, and as of today, there probably is not 2. We only have the 1, and we chose to have the one that is being done by my alderman, Mr. Frost and his wife Lisa and her daughter are the ones that are doing to this, and I'd appreciate a vote for it, please.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. I saw one more hand, Mr. Billick.
Yeah, and if I understand, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and if I understand correctly, actually, this was brought up as layover. I think for the most part, everyone here actually meant to vote to pass this one. It's got unanimous support, but there is actually a time constraint, and it did pass through everything. Honestly, I think this was kind of just grouped in, so.
Thank you very much. So the motion and the second is to lay over. A yes vote lays over the Miro project of $7,000 of host fees. A no vote would allow us to then separately take action this evening. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yes, Mr. Webster.
Just a quick comment. The reasons I asked for the layover are the same as the one for Dorothy. I have no problem with either one of these projects. I just want to know who else has got some skin in the game.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. So again, motion to lay over, a yes vote is a layover. With that, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Is there a first one, Mr. Westcott, and the same?
Yes.
For both of them, so was Mr. Village was the second on that as well?
A yes vote will lay over this item.
We'll start with Mr. Westcott,
No.
Mr. Arena,
No.
Mr. Billich, Mr. Boomer, Mr. Booker,
No.
Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Fellers,
No.
Mr. Fadusha,
No.
Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Kelly,
No.
Mr. McDonald, Mr. Neighbors,
No.
Mrs. Red, Mr. Salgado, Mr. Schultz, Mr. Tassoni,
No.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
one yes, Mr. Chairman, 17.
I've been there. I've been there. Motion fails. We will take up these items separately then. So I'm going to go back to Mr. Westcott to motion in item 2, I believe.
Item 2 is the Mrs. Red's.
Yes, to officially vote.
Okay. I want to, a resolution to provide $30,000 from the Winnebago County host fees to Rockford Park District Foundation for improvements of the West Rock Wake Park development, and I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. Westcott on item 2, the $30,000 for host fees for West Rock Wake Park. I got a second by Mrs. Red. Item is now before the board. Any discussion by board members on item 2 with the West Rock project? Yes, Mr. Billick?
Okay, yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as this 30,000 resolution for 30,000 from the Winnebago County for host fees for this water park, I'm in support of this, and I have been, and I hope, Mrs. Red, you understand that I am in support of it. My concern is actually looking at it from what Paul Arena, and to echo what Paul Arena has said. We're looking at pushing through this through the Rockford Park District Foundation, which I get is just they're a non-for-profit foundation. However, I would like to know that these other organizations like the Rockford Park District, which it has as a taxing body, also has their funding that they also give as well, and why they wouldn't fund one of their own properties that they have. If they are, then that's great, but I would like to see them at least kind of reverberate and show that they are involved with it with us. That was my big concern as well. One of the biggest concerns that I had with that is actually as of recent conversations with a lot of the constituents in my area, as well as some other people that were kind of interested to know about this project. In recent times, some of the park district's properties have actually included now slot machines. As many people know, slot machines tend to generate a pretty nice amount of funds for the establishments locally here that have them. It's not a huge, vast number. However, I have had conversations where they are actually making quite a bit of funding coming in on a monthly basis now from those slot machines. Now, I don't know if that necessarily goes directly to them. I do know that they have contracts with these restaurants that are in place in their establishments, that are running these establishments, that do have contracts where they might give a percentage. So In regards to that, I'd like to be, that's where my hesitation comes from, and I just wanted to make sure that that was voiced out there. As far as this project itself goes, yeah, we need to, obviously, I'd be in support of this. However, I just would ask the board members in future reference if they could be wary and also kind of bring up the answers as far as that goes, as to direct those kind of questions, especially during committee meetings. It was one of those things that just kind of slipped my mind as well, and I just want to make sure that I remind the county board members we're doing a great job so far, and hopefully we stay on top of it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Billick. Any other comments by board members? Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Red, do you believe that the Park District is also contributing money, or is that completely unknown to you?
I can't answer that, but I know I have been talking with the older person, and she's working on that as well, trying to
From
get
the
a
city
match.
standpoint?
Yes, because the Levens Park is in the city.
All right. My concern is about us giving the Park District money, especially if they're not also contributing. Would you be open to amending this to say that we will contribute up to $30,000 matching whatever the Park District is contributing? So if the Park District was putting in 20, we'll be putting in 20 also. The Park District is putting in 10, we'll be putting 10 also. The Park District will put in 30, we're putting in 30. At least then we know.
I'll be open for that.
Okay, then I would like to make that motion, that we amend this, I don't have the language in front of me, to say that we are contributing matching funds up to $30,000, matching what the Park District will contribute.
So we have a motion by Mr. Arena correct me anybody, or Mr. Arena, a resolution, amendment to the resolution, which would read that we are providing a match up to $30,000 to match the Park District's give up to $30,000. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, we have a motion to amend the resolution to make this a match, to match the Park District up to $30,000, not to exceed. May I have a second on this motion? I saw Mr. Hoffman up first, so we have a motion and a second to amend the West Rock Wake Park resolution. That item is now before the board. The motion to amend is before the board. I'll go to Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we're going to amend, refer to the Park District, do we want to add the city into that as well in case they're also willing to chip in? Like the Park District or the city of Rockford?
Well,
Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know that I want to necessarily obligate the city. I'm looking at the Park District because it's their property.
That's what I was saying, either or. Like,
either
yeah,
or.
it doesn't have to be both of them. It could be, or if the city says, yeah, we want to hop in too, that would satisfy a match versus just the Park District satisfying a match.
My issue with it is that we're contributing money to Park District property when they have their own revenue source. So that's the reason for my amendment.
So the motion has not been, the amended motion has not been amended a second time. It is as is. I do not see another motion coming forward right now, so I'll move on to the next person. I'm going to go to Mrs. Gorel, then Mr. Neighbors. Mrs. Gorel.
I think we forgot, thank you, I think we forgot the word foundation in there, because that is what we are matching, would be the foundation, Park Board Foundation, not the Park Board. Now, if I'm wrong, Mr. Kurlinkus, can you correct me on that?
Mr. Kurlinkus?
Sure, thank you. Just reading what the resolution is, and I haven't reviewed the resolution, but just reading it from the agenda, it sounds like the contribution from the county host fee fund would be to the Rockford Park District Foundation. I don't know why they're setting it up that way, but you're correct, it would be to the foundation. So I don't know if what you're going to be talking about, Mr. Billich, this may be what you're getting back to what you were saying, was whether it's going to be a match from the foundation or a match from the Park District, because I think Mr. Arena was talking about the Park District being a separate taxing body, which of course the foundation would not be. So you're correct. It says you're giving the money to the foundation, but I don't know where the match would be coming from.
Mrs. Gorel, I'll just add this, the motion, the amended motion as it stands, as it was read in, was that the match would have to come from the Rockford Park District to the Park District. It doesn't mean, not the foundation. It doesn't mean the money wouldn't go to the foundation, but that, my understanding of the intent of Mr. Arena's amendment was that the Park District, the taxing body, the Park District, would need to match the county's contribution up to 30 grand. If they're in for 30, we'd be in for 30. If they're in for 20, we'd be in for 20. That's my understanding, and I'm seeing Mr. Arena shake his head yes. So that's the intention of what is before the board right now. Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. I believe Mr. Neighbors, then Mrs. Red. Mr. Neighbors.
I just wanted to add, if it's to my understanding that Loves Park is its own revenue source, New Milford has its own revenue source, and all these other municipalities have their own revenue source, and as well as the Park District. And I don't understand why we're trying to see if the difference between them having their own revenue source and us giving them money versus the Park District having their own revenue source and giving the Park District money. And I just think it'd be a disservice to the community if we just vote this down just because we don't know, because they get their own tax and their own revenue source when everybody else that we give money to get their own revenue source as well.
Thank you, Mr. Neighbors. I'll go to Mrs. Red. Mrs. Red?
Thank you, Chairman. The person that made that motion for the Park District, it really should be, I'll ask that you withdraw that and make it to the foundation. Because I did speak with Jay, and he told me it would have to be, go to the foundation. So that's two different entities that we're talking about here.
The money, if I could follow this up, as it stands right now, just so we're clear in the room, the money, if the board approves this money, and if any money goes to the Park District, it would go to the foundation because they're the funding mechanism for this particular project. As it stands right now it's the Park District that would need to be contributing money to the running of that particular operation, which is Levings Park holistically, and part of that is West Rock Wake Park, which is part of the whole of Levings. And so that's where it's at now. Right now, that has not been amended. Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. What happens, I know you're not mentioning the foundation here. You're not mentioning the foundation. So where do they fit in?
They would still get the money as is originally the intent. That's where the money would go.
And we would expect them to donate?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Nothing changes with the intention. Okay. Mr. Kurlinkus.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It suddenly strikes me that probably the reason it has to go to the foundation is the Park District probably cannot accept a donation from another entity. It would probably have to be donated. In this case, this would be in terms of a donation to the foundation and then used for whatever purpose it's designated.
Thank you, Mrs. Red. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would assume the requester was the Rockford Park District Foundation, and if not, whoever that person was. And then just for myself and maybe others would appreciate it, anytime someone's coming with a request, especially of host fee funds, that there's a bit more detail outlined on what the project scope of work would be, what the intentions of the funds are, and what other stakeholders are involved. So we have that, so we don't have this kind of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Any other discussion by board members? The motion in the second is to amend the resolution to make this a match up to $30,000. So as an example, if the Park District's in for up to 30, the county would be in up to 30, and that money would go to the foundation for the specific purpose already stated. That is the motion. A yes vote by board members would then direct us to amend the motion to include that, to include the match. Good? Okay, with that, a yes vote, it makes it a match. A no vote would leave it as is. Let's make this easy. Is there anybody opposed to the match? Please raise your hand if you're opposed to the match. I'm seeing several hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 board members So let's go ahead for the record, just and note that Mr. Booker is a no vote, Mr. Westcott's a no vote, Mr. Neighbors a no, Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Fellers, Mrs. Gorel, Mrs. Red. We have those 7 no votes, and we will cast a yes vote for all members present. So we have now successfully amended the resolution to include a match now. So now before the board is the amended motion, which includes a match up to 30 grand. And again, I don't mean to be redundant, but these things get confusing when people like me are talking too much. If the park district's in for 20 grand, the county's in for 20. If they're in for 30, we're into 30, not to exceed 30. Any other discussion on West Rock Wake Park on the match up to 30 grand? Yes, sir, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I know it's been belabored extensively, but I've heard both that this is a park district property and that it is a for-profit entity. I'm very confused by that. Could somebody clarify that?
I'll take the first swing, and then if anybody wants to jump in, Mr. Westcott, I see another hand up. It is, the park district operates Levings Park, historic Levings Park. On that property is West Rock Wake Park, which is a private sector business. So on that property, in partnership, public-private partnership, there is this entity on that property. That's the extent to which I understand it. Is there anything you want to add, sir?
No.
Anything you want to add? Mr. Neighbors, would you like to speak to that specific question?
So it was the West Wake is a separate business, and the park district owns the properties, but the West Wake business needs improvement to park district property, which they're not allowed to do with their own funds because it's park district property.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Neighbors. Mrs. Red on a follow-up, and then Mrs. Gorel. Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. He's put a lot of his money into that park, and at the point, he's barely breaking even. He can't afford to do any more. I spoke with him about that, and I spoke with Jay. I spoke with the alderperson. So that's where it sits right now.
Thank you, Mrs. Red. Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you, Chairman. Dorothy, do you know if the park district gets a percentage or some type of fee for them using the lake? Since they are a profit organization, are they paying any type of a lease, or are they paying, any type of, what do I want to say, compensation to the park district for the use of the lake?
I cannot answer that question, but I know he told me they were only breaking even. He can't afford a loan.
Thank you, Mrs. Red, for the follow-up. Mrs. Gorel, any other follow-ups to that?
Because I know they do lease out the parks, but the building still belongs to the park board, and that individual cannot work on those buildings. I mean, we're doing the same thing with the water park. It's being leased out. And so we're still responsible to a point with that, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Any other questions, comments by board members? Yes, sir, Mr. Webster.
Yeah, just one comment, thank you. Thank you, Paul, for some quick thinking there. I think that's a very fair amendment you made, and I appreciate that. So therefore, I will be supporting this. As for a private entity, a private group running something or leasing it from the park, that's what happened to Magic Waters. So they have a long-term contract with the park district to guarantee a whole bunch of money. So,
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. Arena on a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so that I'm clear on this, if the Rockford Park District chooses not to match, can this issue come back to the board again in its original form, and maybe with more detail? There's nothing stopping that from happening?
To be very clear, on any item, the board can bring back an item. The board can absolutely bring back an item, is my understanding.
Okay. Yeah, because
Or amend a prior resolution.
But I understand that, the people advocating for this are passionate about it, and I don't want to stand in the way of that. Hopefully, this will result in the Wake Park getting more money than they would have.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Mr. Hoffman?
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to apologize. I have to leave, pick my brother up at the airport, so I just didn't want to walk out, so.
Are we ready for a quick vote on this, so we can include Mr. Hoffman in his final act tonight as a board member? Not of all time, just tonight. What? I think I'm saying something, I'm just talking about tonight. If that, we'll go ahead and call the roll on this.
And then you're going to state the motion again?
Yes, the motion in the second is the resolution to provide a match up to $30,000 to the Rockford Park District Foundation, provided that there is a match from the Rockford Park District related to this West Rock Wake Park project.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Billich?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer? Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby? Mr. Fellers?
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia? Mrs. Gorel? Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors?
Yes.
Mrs. Red? Mr. Salgado? Mr. Schultz? Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster? Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Arena?
Yes.
Motion passes. 15 yes. 2 absent, 1 abstention.
Thank you, and I believe, and if I'm mistaken, I'm not trying to cause a problem, but I believe when people abstain, is there a conflict, or do we?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, the reason why I abstained, it was my previous employer.
Thank you, just for the record, thank you. Motion passes. We'll move on to the next one. The second item for vote for the Economic Development Committee, I'm going to go to Mr. Westcott.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm in the right one. Resolution directing the county of Winnebago to use $7,000 of host fee? Nope.
Item 3.
Item 3, okay. All right, those are done. Right? Okay. We got the resolution granting authority to the Winnebago County Board Chairman to execute the documents necessary to complete a loan for $50,000 from the revolving loan fund to State Line Swiss Manufacturing LLC, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Westcott on item 3, the $50,000 for the revolving loan fund to State Line Swiss Manufacturing. May I have a second? Mr. Billick, may I have any discussion by board members? Mr. Boomer?
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for, I was back here, okay. Can you explain what State Line Swiss Manufacturing is?
I can't, but I believe Chairman Ken, you or Carla?
I'll go to Carla and/or Chris Dornbush on the Swiss,
We'll find
State Line
somebody.
Swiss Manufacturing LLC.
Chris, it's your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. State Line Swiss Manufacturing is an existing business. They specialize in precision parts, manufacturing utilizing state-of-the-art CNC machining equipment. They serve industries such as automotive, aerospace, hydraulic components, medical, firearms components, and fasteners, in short.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Any
Boomer.
follow-up, Mr. Boomer?
No, I just, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions by board members on the $50,000 revolving loan fund to State Line Swiss Manufacturing LLC? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Westcott.
I believe that ends my report.
No.
All right. Here we go again. I thought we just had that.
That's the Westlake, and this is...
See, I'm not the only one that's confused right now. Okay, now we have a resolution directing the county of Winnebago to use $7,000 of the host fees to become a wall mural sponsor, the Rockford Area Convention and Visitor Bureau's State of Illinois Wall Mural Grant Project, and I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. Westcott on the wall mural sponsorship of $7,000 from host fees. May I have a second? Mr. Billick, Mrs. Gorel, Mrs. Red. Item is now before the board. Any discussion by board members? Yes, Mrs. Gorel, then Mr. Schultz. Mrs. Gorel?
I'm sure sorry, thank you, I'm sure sorry to have to keep interrupting, but you know, that has been a citywide thing. We have many, many sponsors involved in it. This is not just something from Winnebago County. Actually, we're probably one sponsor out of, I would say even 20 or 30 people, or organizations is what I should say.
Right.
It is a big thing, and it's beautifying not only Rockford, but I had company come here from Dallas this past week for a funeral and couldn't get over how beautiful our downtown has turned out. And remember, the downtown is the hub of the whole Winnebago County, and it's looking fantastic. They couldn't get over it. Thank you.
And I believe thank you, Mrs. Gorel. I believe we're pulling in some outside money, or they're pulling in outside some match funds as well. Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Fellers. I'm sorry. Mr. Schultz, then Mr. Fellers. I apologize. Mr. Schultz.
Just hearing the testimony on this, if we don't pay for it, somebody else will. It's the last spot available, and whenever we can save taxpayer dollars, I'd say even $7,000, it's worth it. The money, it's not that it isn't going to get funded, and I don't think we have to have our name on it.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to follow on what you said. Yes, this is a match. This is actually a matched, I think, 1-to-1 for the 7. And Mr. Westcott, which location was this? Was it the end of the Jefferson Street Bridge one?
I think it is the 7th, yes, I do.
Under the Jefferson Street Bridge. You know, I drove by with my kids down there just the other day, and they were...
Amazing.
They thought it looked absolutely amazing, and they were actually still painting it. They made sure we opened up the window so they could yell at them because they thought it was so cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Any other discussion on board members on the $7,000 host fees to the wall mural sponsorship? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? No. We have 3 no votes. Mr. Schultz, please note, Mr. Schultz, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Kelly are no votes, and I believe we're casting a yes vote for all other members present. Motion passes. Mr. Westcott.
That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. And as we said, we did push the Great Neighborhoods back to committee, that laid over in committee. Next item of business, Mr. McDonald, Operations Administrative Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Operations Administration has several resolutions before us tonight. The first is a resolution awarding project manager services, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution awarding project manager services. May I have a second? Mr. Tassoni. Thank you. Item is now before the board. Any discussion by board members? Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say that I had opportunity to partake in this committee, if that's proper terminology. It was, I don't know, 3 or 4 month process with upwards of 7 prospective candidates. And it was very interesting. Like, say, the coroner was in there, John Franks was in there, compliments to Ann and Carlo over here for all their involvement. And I think at the end of the day, all things considered, this was the best choice we could have made in that committee. Thank you.
Thank you for serving on that, Mr. Tassoni. Any other questions by board members? Again, we got a motion, a second, on the program manager to address the future use of the public safety building. Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes. We have a program manager. Thank you very much. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second item is a resolution authorizing execution of an intergovernmental agreement for information technology support services between the County of Winnebago and Region 1 Planning Council. And I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution for the IGA for IT services between the county and our one planning council. Mr. Fiducia on the second. Thank you very much. Item is now before the board. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is a resolution appointing personnel to negotiate an intergovernmental agreement regarding the Winnebago County PSAP Center on behalf of the county, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution appointing personnel to negotiate the IGA with Winnebago County PSAP Coalition Center on behalf of the county. A second. May I have a second, please? Mr. Boomer. Item is now before the board. Just a question is, are we appointing specific folks, and who are those folks, Mr. McDonald?
Yes, sir, I'd be happy to answer that. It'd be myself, Jaime Salgado as Chairman of Finance, and Dave Boomer as the caucus chair.
So with that being just a follow-up, as I'm processing, I apologize. So there's 3 people, and are all 3 on the Finance Committee? I think.
Yes.
Okay, so then those would be, I think that's a majority of a quorum of committees, so there'll be posted meetings. Okay, we got a motion and a second on the personnel for the 911 negotiation. Any other comments by board members or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is a resolution awarding electricity bid for Highway Department, and I so move.
Got a motion, item 5 on the resolution awarding electricity bid for the Highway Department. May I have a second? Mrs. Crosby. Item is now before the board. Thank you very much. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Next, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, our final resolution is a resolution awarding electricity bid. I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. McDonald on item 6, the resolution awarding the electricity bid. May I have a second to that motion, please? Mr. Fellers, thank you. Item is now before the bid. The only question I'd open with is the bid, we see the one before was for the Highway Department. Could there be a little more specificity on what this is for?
Absolutely. I defer to Ms. Ann Johns.
Ann?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is for all other accounts besides highways, roughly 20 accounts, electricity accounts. It's everything else but the highway.
And could you mention the savings, please?
On the highway, we're saving $3,600 a year. On the 20 accounts, we're saving $163,300 a year based on what we're paying now. So it's a significant amount, a 21% savings.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks for your hard work on that. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald.
That concludes the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Next item of business, Public Works Committee, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Public Works Committee has 18 resolutions this evening. Call the question. No, excuse me. No, your Public Works Committee brings forth one resolution this evening, 15-012. It's a bid awarding mowing and vegetation control. It's a cost of approximately $41,000 over a 2-year contract with a possible renewal for another 3. It is a local contractor, and I would so move.
Got a motion by Mr. Tassoni, Public Works 19-012, awarding bids for mowing and vegetation control. May I have a second? Second by Mr. Webster. Thank you very much. Any discussion by board members on this resolution or bid? Mr. Fellers.
Thank you. Just one question. Mr. Tassoni, is this just for county roads, or is it also perhaps for like blighted properties in the county, or any mowing that needs to be done?
No, this is primarily for right-of-way, road, bridge, culvert, guardrails, and median spraying, stuff like that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tassoni. Thank you for the question, Mr. Fellers. A follow-up by Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. On Cunningham, I think it's Cunningham, there are railroad tracks that are beneath, the highway. Sometimes they're overgrown, and there's a curve. You cannot see the cars coming in the curve. Will this take care of that?
I don't believe so, and Mr. Molina's here. If it's railroad right-of-way property, they would be liable for that. Maybe if it's an obstruction on county right-of-way, we may engage in some type, if it's a safety issue, but if Mr. Molina would speak to that, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Sassoni. Yes, this will not take care of that. We have to, we will send our guys out there and they will trim whatever brush that is obstructing the sight distance coming out of that side street there.
Just to follow up, Carlos, then who's responsible? Whose jurisdiction would that be, and who would be responsible? If now we can follow up on that.
Right. But if it is obstructing sight distance, I think it's a safety concern, so we would go out and we're not going to be on the railroad. This is, if I'm not mistaken, what this is just behind the guardrail, but it's brush that is growing from down below. So we can only take care of what's over the railroad. I'm sorry, the guardrail.
In the past, they have taken care of it, but like the last year, they didn't do anything because they said they were short of help. So I don't know if you are aware of it, but something needs to be done.
So if we could follow up maybe offline or after this meeting, if you send me a note, or Carlos, we can at least follow up on that specific issue anytime you want to follow up on that. So thank you very much, Mrs. Red. Any other discussion on this item? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. And Carlos, if you could maybe identify the railroad ownership and maybe just send them an email and question whether or not they could give it some attention.
Sure. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Any other discussion on this item, 19012, awarding bids for mowing vegetation control? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Tassoni.
Yes, and I believe our next Public Works meeting will be at, should be 5 p.m. on the 29th next week.
Thank you very much. Public Safety Committee, Mr. Booker. Thank you again, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Chairman. On the agenda is a resolution for an agreement with the Winnebago Fire Department and the County of Winnebago for the Winnebago Fire Department to provide paramedic services to the Sheriff's Department should there be any SWAT call-outs. I was notified today by our Assistant State's Attorney John Giliberti that he was notified by the Winnebago District legal attorney that they weren't ready. They want to tweak the agreement a little bit more, so we're going to hold off on it. Chief Carner, were you aware of Winnebago's?
I knew they had some questions. I thought they were minor and really didn't go to the heart of the agreement, but we can address that.
It appears to be minor at this time, but I encourage the Sheriff's Department and the Winnebago Fire to get it all gathered and solidified. We were ready to ink the agreement tonight, and
Well, we initiated the agreement. We've been on top of it every step along the way.
yep, there's no fault on the Sheriff's Department at all. It was something that was brought up by the Winnebago Fire District attorney. So when we're ready, we will present that agreement.
Thank you. So we don't need to take any motion. We're just going to not take action this evening on this resolution with the idea, I'm sure there'll be an email exchange tomorrow between the obvious parties, and we'll bring this back, and this will come back in 2 weeks.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And since it was on the agenda, I thought I'd better address it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Booker, and thank you, Mr. Carner. Next item of business, Personnel Policy Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Personnel and Policies Committee has one resolution. That resolution is renewing a contract for nursing services with super nurse, and I so move.
Thank you. We've got a motion by Mr. Fiducia on the resolution authorizing the administrator of River Bluff Nursing Home to renew the agreements for nursing services. May I have a second, please? Mrs. Squirrel, thank you. And then the item is now before the board. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now for some important information. Animal Services had 895 calls for services. We own 145 dogs, 128 cats. We own 2 parrots, 1 chicken, 2 ferrets, 1 ball python snake, and 1 potbelly pig. We've adopted out 56 dogs, 56 cats, and the pig is gone, and we've gotten rid of the chicken. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Any unfinished business? Yes, Mr. McDonald, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to ask Debbie Carter, have you had an opportunity to find out why we changed the tablets from the general fund to the commissary?
Yes, Mr. McDonald, checked with the sheriff and Superintendent Redmond. That is a result of a change in state law. Superintendent Redmond notified Carla and Mr. Crowley of that change earlier in an email earlier this year, and we're scheduled to undergo a full audit November 19th. Thank you.
Thank you. Carla?
The document I received just said there had to be a full accounting of those revenues. It didn't say it had to be in the commissary's fund. So if there's something to that effect, we'd like to have that information.
We could follow that up, I'm sure, tomorrow. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Carner, and Carla. We have Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster had his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to tell everyone that I hope they have a safe and happy holiday and remember what Memorial Day is all about.
Thank you very much, and hang tight because we got a couple of appointments to read in. I do see, if it's okay with the board, I'm going to go back to Mr. Carner, who has his hand up, and I think it's about the issue. Mr. Carner.
Superintendent sent me a copy of the email that sent circulated, and it's dated December 18, 2018. And it said, "Paul, today, December 18, 2018, the Winnebago County Jail was inspected by the Illinois Department of Corrections. Criminal Justice Specialist Mike Leathers conducted the inspection effective January 1, 2019. And it's in parentheses, it says, "See attached letter. Changes have been made regarding the inmate commissary account. One major change pointed out by Mr. Leathers is the revenue from the inmate phone system must be placed into the inmate commissary fund. Currently, the revenue has been placed in the general fund." And then it goes on to say, "I would ask that the attached be reviewed and make procedures you feel we should take to be in compliance with standards. Thank you, Superintendent Redmond." That was December 18th.
Okay. We'll follow up on that. Thank you. Any follow-up or?
I just was referring to the document that was provided on the statement.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other items before we go to new business? So under new business, we have 7 appointments to be read in this evening, ranging from North Park Water, Harlem Cemetery District has multiple appointments as well, in the Northwest Fire Protection District, and I'm just asking that we read those in this evening. We've read that in this evening. These will lay over for 2 weeks. With that, I would take a motion to adjourn. I got a motion by Mr. Fellers, and I have a second by Mr. Webster. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.